What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be building the ultimate RTX 3050 gaming PC build. For this system, we've gone all out to create a budget powerhouse that runs super quiet, super cool, and gives us some great frame rates in the latest AAA titles. Tying in a bit of an ASUS ROG and Cooler Master theme, I'll also be including the brand new Cooler Master HAF500, a remastered version of an old classic. This build is going to be a good one, so let's go ahead and dive right into it. As with all of the builds on the channel, we're going to kick things off by installing as many components into the motherboard as possible, creating our motherboard assembly. I'll be building this system today around the ASUS ROG STRIX B550F Gaming. Now, this is one of the more pricey B550 boards out there, but with support for Gen 4 SSDs, USB-C, a built-in rear I/O shield, and heatsinks included for those NVMe drives, it really does have plenty of bells and whistles. Plus, the ability to overclock the latest Ryzen 5000 CPUs out of the box with no BIOS update is a huge bonus. We'll be taking advantage of this when it comes to the CPU choice for this system. I've gone ahead and picked up the AMD Ryzen 5 5600X, a 6-core 12-thread powerhouse that we should see some good deals coming online for very shortly, especially with the pressure of the latest Intel releases and the rumoured AMD 6000 series, which we should see fairly soon. Installing the CPU into the motherboard is pretty easy. You guys know how this one goes, but if you don't worry, I'll walk you through it one more time. On the processor, you will see a little golden triangle. That's this little triangle right here. We need to match this up with the triangle on the CPU socket, which in our case is over here on the bottom left corner. Go ahead and lift up the arm on your CPU socket, drop your Ryzen processor into place, and then the arm will secure right back down. It should need no pressure or force and go in just like so. While we're here, we can also go ahead and install the RAM or the memory into this build. I've selected this lovely kit from Patriot. This is their Viper Steel. This has got some RGB up top, a 3600 MHz clock speed, and of course two 8GB DIMMs gives us 16 gigs of dual channel memory. Important when it comes to the frame rate of a Ryzen processor. I'm going to install it into our RAM DIMM slots just down here. Specifically, I'll be using the second and the fourth slots on the motherboard. Pull back the clips on the left hand side of the DIMMs, line up your gold notch, and clip the RAM into place. Apply a bit of pressure with each of your thumbs on either side, and that will secure it in. As you can see, we've also got two DIMMs free, giving us great opportunities for future upgrades. The last component to install onto the motherboard before we start moving it around and getting our case involved is the storage. Now, truth be told, you can pick any NVMe Gen 3 or Gen 4 drive, and if you want to save some money, check out our alternative options linked below. This is intended to be the ultimate 3050 build though, featuring ASUS's top-end STRIX cooler, and that's where the WD Black SN850 comes in. It's a Gen 4 drive that still doesn't break the bank, but gives us 1TB of super fast storage. We're talking 7GB a second on the read and about 5.3 gigs on the write. Really impressive stuff. Plus, the drive comes with a built-in heatsink, a built-in cooler, helping to keep it nice and chilly. Installing this into the motherboard is a pretty easy process. Just remove the included M.2 screw from the top slot on the small silver standoff, and then we can go ahead and slide the drive into place. Pop it into your slot at a 45-degree angle, clip it in, and drop it down. Use the same screw we just removed to secure the drive back into place, and that's looking really very nice. Aesthetically as well, works perfectly with what we're going for in today's build. Once the motherboard assembly is complete, we can move on to the case. And boy, have I got a treat for you. That was the worst pun in the world, but this right here is Cooler Master's brand new HAF500. A nod to the old high airflow range of cases. This should perform a lot better than the H500P, if you remember that nugget from Cooler Master a few years ago. 200mm fans at the front for plenty of airflow. Black and white colorways available. I really hope this is the black. Yes, it is. The black case, the white would not work for this system. And I'm not being funny. First impressions, even on the box, it looks sick. So let's go ahead and unbox it. Looks like we've got USB-C on here too. Good work, Cooler Master. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Cooler Master know how to make a case. I just wish they'd release more of them. What a monster. Oh my goodness. The build quality on this thing, it feels like a bit of a juggernaut, really. Wow. The large 200mm ARGB fans as well look great. They'll look even better when they're powered up later. I don't want to get too carried away though. What we do need to do for now is remove all of our case's side panels, taking off as many of these as we possibly can to make the whole build process that little bit easier. It turns out that in this case, these thumb screws are not very thumbable. You need a screwdriver because they're very tight from the factory, so let's remove those. That has got to be one of the heaviest side panels in the world. My goodness. This is interesting. The panel doesn't go all the way to the top. It's almost like Cooler Master have added an extension, not to their house or to their office, but to their case, which I kind of understand for radiator clearance. Maybe it saves money on case tooling. If it works, I'm easy, just a little bit weird. A couple of cool features to take a look at off the bat include this, which is like an adjustable fan mount for your graphics card to blow cool air into the GPU. Tightens up with a thumb screw. That's quite cool. Power supply shield. It's plastic, which is a little bit cheap for the price of the case, but I'll get over it. Sickle flow RGB fan at the rear as well, an RGB one. That's still a sickle flow fan. It's just non-RGB. So great to see this case, in theory, actually living up to its high airflow credentials. What we're going to do next is we're going to lay the chassis down flat. We'll take more of a look at the case a little bit later, because what we need to do is install the motherboard. Let's pop the fan down out of the way, tuck away our cables a little bit, and then we can slide the motherboard into place. At this stage of the build, I might be telling you to match up standoff holes with motherboard holes, but because this is an ATX case and an ATX board, we don't need to do that. They're all in the right place. Instead, we can go ahead and drop the motherboard in. We've got a built-in rear IO shield in this case as well, which makes the installation process a lot easier. All of your screws are ready to go, included with your chassis, in a little bag over here at the bottom of the case. 3 screws at the top, 3 along the middle, and 3 across the bottom to be exact. And once you've done that, the motherboard is all good to go. Once the motherboard is installed, we're then able to move on to our CPU cooler. This right here is Cooler Master's brand new PL240 Flux. And once again, this is a bit overkill for the system today, but it will give us plenty of overclocking headroom for the CPU, keep the whole PC nice and cool, and fit in with the high-end, high airflow theme we're going for. If you would like to see some of our cheaper RTX 3050 builds, we'll also link those in the cards and in the description below to check out. I'm going to walk you through step by step the installation process for the cooler, something which can be quite daunting, but it's actually not all that difficult. Step 1, go ahead and remove all of the included cooling hardware from the cooler's box. Laying this out will make the whole next part of the process a lot easier. This includes the bag of mounting hardware and of course our sickle flow RGB fans. With the AMD CPUs, you're actually going to use these included black brackets that come with your motherboard to secure the cooler down. These will fasten around our CPU on the motherboard. The next stage of the process is then just laying the radiator down and installing our 2 sickle flow fans, which are positioned to pull air through the radiator, exhausting the air from the case. And then we're also going to add on these little brackets for our AMD cooler onto the water block itself. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and screw the radiator into the top of the case, loosen those brackets and slot them over the 2 black pieces we just reinstalled. Tighten them up with the thumb screws to make sure the cooler is not going to go anywhere, and don't forget a dab of thermal paste if your cooler doesn't have it pre-applied, you're reusing it, etc, etc. And once you've done that, the case is looking great, the cooler's looking bloody fantastic, and we're ready to move on to the next component, the GPU.
Eliminated. Double kill. Objective is no longer secure.
Specifically, this right here is the RTX 3050 from ASUS. This is the latest budget card that Nvidia have brought to market. Rumours are that supply should be better than other launches, though let's be honest, that's not exactly going to be hard. With 8GB of video memory and a better memory bus than we've seen on the new 6500 XT, a card that got, by all intensive purposes, absolutely slated, this is looking more promising. Plus, of course, the inclusion of DLSS and ray tracing tech makes this a great option. This is an RTX card, not a GTX card, which is a very important distinction to make. You of course get a video encoder on the card as well, something AMD was slammed for not including on the 6500 XT. This STRIX 3050 card is pretty overkill for a 3050 by all intensive purposes, but it is still a fantastic way of evaluating the performance of the new 3050 lineup. 1080p is where the sweet spot for this card really lies, as we'll learn more about later in the gaming benchmark section of this video. Plus, all the airflow on this card with its triple fan cooler will work great in the case, and the card has as you can see, is pretty well proportioned for the build today. Hovering it over our PCI slot also shows us which of the rear covers need removing. That's these metal covers right here. There's 7 in total in this case, and we need to remove the second and the third. Once we've done that, we can slide the GPU in and use the same screws that have just come out to secure it into place and make sure our lovely, quite heavy card doesn't go anywhere. Once you've done that, you can then even angle your sickle flow fan to point extra airflow towards the card. Not that, to be honest, it's really going to need it in this system. We can then wrap up the build portion of today's video by taking a look at the final component, the power supply. Now this right here is a 750 watt unit from Cooler Master. To tell you the truth, the 650 watt will also work well. The 3050 is not a particularly power intensive card, but with a semi-fanless mode, an 80 plus gold certification and all that jazz, it's a great unit. With also a nice bit of upgradability on there as well. Want to step up to something like a 4070 when Nvidia inevitably release that card, whatever they call it, you can do so with this power supply. It really is future-proof for the next 8, 9, 10 years, and that's backed by a really strong warranty as well. This particular video isn't going to be a full cables and wiring guide, so if you want to take a look at one of those, it will be on the channel. In short though, we will be installing separate power cables for the GPU, for the CPU, motherboard, and then one for any of our RGB as well, in the form of a SATA power connection. Fully modular power supplies are great because they allow you to just really plug in the cables you actually need to use, helping to keep cable clutter to a minimum. Something which in this case, with the included hard drive bays and shorter power supply shield, will actually be quite beneficial. I've just gone to spin the case around and I've been greeted by quite a surprising feature, no rear power supply access. So actually, we need to spin the case back around to the front. That's a surprise. Remove a thumb screw, and then I think this plastic power supply shield should pop out. I quite like this case. It is a bit of a throwback, and it's definitely not going to be for everyone. So if you're considering it, make sure to read up on builds and reviews like this one, because it is, in all honesty, cool, but a bit of an acquired taste. And once we've done that, the build is basically ready to go. I'll be rejoining you in just a few moments to test out the performance of the 3050, one of the most important questions we've still got about the card. But first, we need to boot our HAF system up and see just how good it looks in an epic glam montage. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage.
Teammate got a proper sorting. Hostile dropping into the area.
One enemy remaining.
Perfection.
Lovely stuff. Now that we've seen just how good the system looks when it's all powered up, it's time to make sure the performance is just as good. And I'm glad to announce the system gave us some really strong results. On your screen now is a summary, a snapshot view of all the different games we tested, so you can pick your favourite title, find out what frame rate it is, and make sure it meets your standards. But don't worry, we'll be diving into more detail title by title, kicking things off by looking at GTA 5 a little bit more closely. Now here we tested the game in the inbuilt benchmarking mode and achieved an average of 138 frames per second at 1080p high settings. The game visually looked really great. The benchmark mode is an awesome test. Although it's an older game, you can jump through, test your own system, and see how it compares to this 3050 budget powerhouse. It was a similarly positive story in Battlefield 2042, where at 1080p high settings with DLSS enabled and set to performance mode, that is of course Nvidia's fancy and fantastic, I might add, AI-backed resolution scaler, we achieved 106 FPS on average. This was actually around 34 frames per second higher than without DLSS enabled, but visually didn't have all that big of an impact. Call of Duty's Vanguard is next up today. Here we test it out at 1080p high settings. One of the latest COD games, it's really important that the 3050 gets this title right, as it sets the precedent for how future AAA titles might react with Nvidia's budget GPU. Well, I'm glad to announce that here at 1080p high with DLSS once again enabled, we got 115 frames per second, just shy of 40 FPS more than with DLSS disabled. Moving on to Forza Horizon 5 next up, we tested out using the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode and at 1080p high settings saw 98 FPS on average. Really strong result and the game looked great. Moving on to Halo Infinite, here we also tested at 1080p high settings and once again got some really solid frame rates. To be specific, we got 87 FPS on average, with 80 and 74 for the 90 and the 99th percentile results. Moving on to Apex Legends next, a slightly older title, but one that's arguably even more important for the 3050, to show its nous at those esports level, high frame rate titles. Here we achieved over 100 frames per second on average at 1080p high settings, showing that you could easily jump to the 150 mark if you tuned it down to competitive or low settings across the board to maximise your frame rate. Moving on to Valorant next up, this is a game where frame rate is of abundance, but I still wanted to test it out on the 3050 to make sure it stacks up and performs well. I'm glad to report that 1080p high settings yielded 370 FPS on average, with consistent frame rates measured, as with all our games, in both NVIDIA FrameView and MSI Afterburner's Reaver wherever possible. The penultimate title, the one but last before we look at Fortnite, is of course Call of Duty's Warzone. Vanguard gave us some great results, but what about Warzone? Well, at 1080p high settings with DLSS enabled and set to balanced, we achieved once again over 100 FPS, 105 frames per second to be precise. This was actually less than on Call of Duty Vanguard, which is kind of crazy. Frame rates once again very solid and very consistent. Finally, to round things off, Fortnite was our last title today, and we tested this at 1080p competitive settings. Make sure to give this video a like, by the way, if you appreciate the number of games we went to the effort of testing on our third 3050 build. Here we got 192 FPS on average, with 183 and 166 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. It rounds out a really impressive run of games for this video, and shows just how impressed we are with the RTX 3050. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a big old like rating, get subscribed if you aren't already. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.